went to Jerusalem, and after staying there 3 days, I set out during the night with a few others. I had not told anybody what my God had put in my heart to do for Jerusalem. There were no mounts with me except the one I was riding on. By night I went out through the valley gate toward the Jackal Well and the Dung Gate, examining the walls of Jerusalem which had been broken down, and its gates which had been destroyed by fire. Then I moved on toward the Fountain Gate and the King's Pool, but there was not enough room for my mount to get through, so I went up the valley by night examining the wall. Finally, I turned back and re-entered through the valley gate. The officials did not know where I had gone or what I was doing, because as yet I had said nothing to the Jews or priests or nobles or officials or any others who would be doing the work. Then I said to them, "You see the trouble we are in? Jerusalem lies in ruins, and its gates have been burned with fire. Come, let us rebuild the wall of Jerusalem, and we will no longer be in disgrace." I also told them about the gracious hand of my God on me and what the king had said to me. They replied, "Let us start rebuilding." And so they began this good work. But when Sanballat the Horonite, Tobiah the Ammonite official, and Geshem the Arab heard about it, they mocked and ridiculed us. "What is this you are doing?" they asked. "Are you rebelling against the king?" I answered them by saying, "The God of heaven will give us success. We, his servants, will start rebuilding, but as for you, you have no share in Jerusalem or any claim or historic right to it."
When we left the story of Nehemiah last weekend, he had already discovered his holy discontent, that divine frustration, which was that God's city, the holy city of Jerusalem, was in disarray. Its walls were broken down, its gates were burned down, the people felt defeated, they were in constant fear of attack. And yet what was most upsetting to Nehemiah, as you remember from last week, is that his God, the God of the Israelites, was being mocked and disgraced every single hour of every single day that the city stayed in that defeated condition. So Nehemiah, has this moment of holy discontent. We called it last week like his Popeye moment, where he said, "That's all I can stand. I can't stand no more. I have to do something about this. I have to go back there and rebuild the city." Pops his can of spinach so that he has strength to push through the fear and the hesitation of approaching the king and so. But he pushes through that fear. Remember from last week, he arranged a leave of absence from the king of Persia. And he obtains travel documents that will assure safe journey. He loads the lumber for the gates, and the king supplied all that for him. And then he went on an 800-mile journey from where he was all the way to the city of Jerusalem, and he finally arrived safely. Now, what does a fantastic leader do who's all fired up about rebuilding walls and gates? What does he do after an 800-mile journey when he first arrives in the city? I mean, he's got to call a meeting, doesn't he? He's got to cast a vision. He's got to rally people. He's got to get going. That's not what this great leader does. First thing he does after this 800-mile journey is he takes 3 days off and he replenishes himself. The scriptures tell us, Nehemiah 2:11, he replenished himself for 3 days. He was a very smart leader. Leaders don't lead well on empty tanks. In fact, leaders can be dangerous on empty tanks. Now, I've drawn this for you many times before. I refer to it as sort of your vitality or your energy bucket. This is for everybody. It has special meaning probably to leaders. But you know how you feel when your vitality bucket is full. If you're filled up with God, if you're filled up with the love of family, if you're filled up with rest, exercise, good food, if you're at your best in your vitality bank, well, you make great decisions. You have patience for people. Everything's working well if you're filled up in your vitality bucket. If you're on empty, any of you ever been there? On empty? You're dangerous. You're dangerous to other people. You're irritable, impatient. You make bad decisions. You pray careless prayers. You make escapist decisions sometimes. Well, from a leadership perspective, and Nehemiah understands this, energy really matters to leadership. In fact, everybody in an organization keys off the energy of the leader. So if a leader's moping around, people around the leader will mope around. And if a leader is energized, that energy will seep into the hearts of all the people around that energized leader, and then you can get something going. So Nehemiah says, first thing I got to do is I got to fill up my tanks. Now, a quick question here, and I want you to do like a 10-second turn to the person next to you. Where you sit right now today, are you about half full, are you filled up, or are you on empty? Tell the person next to you very, very quickly where you are, okay? Real quick. Okay, now, just a quick word of warning. If you're sitting next to someone who admitted that they're on empty, be careful. They might be real ornery. They might pick your wallet. I don't know what they're going to do. But if they're on empty, you know, they don't make great decisions. Half full, well, whatever. But here's the next thing that you have to understand, and I've talked to you about this before. I want to talk to you again. Sometimes I have to repeat stuff, you see. But whose job is it to refill your vitality bucket? Whose job is that? That's your job. That's your job. It's not your spouse's job, your boss's job, their board's job. It's your job. So that's what Nehemiah was doing. He said, I have to step into this leadership vacuum and rebuild these walls and gates. I can't do it on empty. And so he starts those streams of replenishment. The Bible doesn't tell us exactly what he does. Maybe he sleeps for a day and a half. Then maybe he exercises. Maybe he eats good food. And maybe he sits down and reads the scriptures or whatever, meets with friends. I don't know. But all of us have these streams of replenishment that we have to use to fill ourselves up. But just one more time, if you're a leader, everybody keys off the energy of the leader. You've got to keep your tanks filled, okay? Okay, now let's watch Nehemiah perform another classic leadership function. Second thing he does is he defines reality. He defines reality. You read this from the text just before I started speaking. Under the cover of darkness, he takes a few buddies and he inspects every gate and he inspects every single inch of the torn down wall. He looks at all the piles of rubble. He goes all the way around the city, in and out of every single gate. What's he doing? He wants to be absolutely sure what the conditions are that he's dealing with. He has to define reality. How good is it? How bad is it? Is it terrible? This is very important in leadership. Because if you're facing a challenge and you haven't defined the reality, you might get overly optimistic and say, hey, I can do this in 3 days, and then get in real trouble, or you might get it wrong the other way and fall into despair. So leaders know they have to define reality, they have to process it to make sure they have a firm grasp on it, and then, perhaps most importantly, at the right time, you have to proclaim or you have to describe or communicate the reality to the team, to the people. I was explaining this concept to a group of pastors and leaders that I was mentoring somewhere recently. And in the course of conversation, someone asked me if I ever thought about quitting Willow. I said, well, that's kind of a, downer. Why do you want to talk about that? And say, well, because many of us think about quitting every month. And I go, well, I don't think about it that often, once a decade or something. But I said, all right, in the early years, I'll tell you about a time, and it has to do with this defining reality thing. Early days of Willow, in the first year or so, we knew that it was going to be very dangerous to talk about money because we were a brand new startup church in a movie theater. Nobody knew us. If we start talking about money, they'd think we're a cult. So we didn't pass any offering plates. I never talked a word about how the church was going to be financed. We had one basket in the lobby of the rented theater, okay? As you might suspect, we started falling into financial ruin. And before the first year was out, Lynn and I were both working other jobs. The church couldn't pay us. The church wasn't paying its bills. We were sliding more and more into, bankruptcy, essentially, both Lynn and me and the church. And the longer this went on, the more frustrated I got. So I understood the financial reality, but I didn't communicate it to anybody, okay? So here's what I did. Now, I'm not, you're not going to believe this, but I was 22 years old, so give me a little slack. So I finished a sermon one day, and I can't hold the frustration in any longer. Lynn and I are going to have to declare bankruptcy, and we're going to have to shut the doors of the church. So I finished my sermon, and I said, hey, one more thing. There's like 200 people in the theater at the time. I said, one more thing. I'm getting in my car after this sermon, and I'm going to drive west. And I don't know when I'm going to turn around or if I'm going to turn around. I don't know when I'm coming back or if I'm going to come back. Okay? People are like, wow, what's up with this? And it was just really quiet. And I said, and I'm doing this because I'm so frustrated with you people because you don't support this church financially. Anyone who attends a church knows that you can't keep a church going unless some people would give of their tithes and offerings. And I said, none of you give anything. And my wife and I are going bankrupt, and this is just very, very frustrating to me, so I'm heading west. No? That's how I ended, and I walked off the stage. Now, a line formed real fast, probably 40 or 50 people in the line, and they all asked me the same question. Why didn't you tell us? Why didn't you tell us? Had you told us that the church had any need, we love this little church. We love what God's doing in this movie theater. We would have been generous if you had told us. Well, I worked that line, and I'm still mad. I'm like, they should have known. So I get in the car, and I drive west. And I was mad all the way to Vegas. God met me in Vegas, kind of turned my head around a little bit. And then I realized as I drove all the way back, you know what? It was my fault. The whole thing was my fault. I had properly defined reality, the economic condition of our church. I had not properly declared it or communicated it. Leaders, you have to know the condition of what it is you're leading. You have to know it inside and out. You got to know it up close. You have to define reality and call it what it is. And you have to declare reality from time to time. Many years ago, I was on a sailboat racing team, and we knew we had a terrific team. And we set as a goal the national championship. We had an America's Cup sailor who sailed with us kind of as the captain of that team. So he says at the beginning of the season, he goes, if you want to win the national championship, there's a price to pay. So here's what we're going to do. After every single race, and we had more than 100 races over the course of a summer, he goes, after every race, we're going to take the sails down, and I'm going to define reality. I'm going to tell you guys as a crew exactly what you did right. I'm going to commend you for it. And then I'm going to tell you what you did wrong, and we're going to fix it. But we're going to hear reality. I'm going to describe it to you, and we're going to face it, and we're going to improve. And, you know, after race 30 or race 40 or race 50, we're like, he's not going to keep doing this. He did it all the way to the national finals. Every single race, take the sails down. Guys, you did this right, this right, this right. And then he'd call names. He'd say, Hybels, you were 2 seconds slow on that jibe set, and it cost us around that jibe mark there, and you got to be 2 seconds quicker. I want a commitment. Like, I'm committed, like that. But, he defined reality, declared reality. We won the national championship. A lot of it was simply because we dealt firmly in the realm of reality that whole season. I have a friend who runs a small trucking company. Every Friday, he meets with all the truckers, and he just calls it the Friday morning reality check. Stands with cups of coffee with everybody. It says, here's the reality. Here's how we did this week. Here's fuel expenses. Here's what went well. Here's what didn't go well. Everybody knows exactly where they stand. Now, here's the point, and then I'll move on. When you define reality and when you declare reality, what does it build? It builds trust. It builds trust. Everybody knows exactly where everything is at. No secrets. So you take to today, run the clock ahead, 40 years. How does anyone around Willow know the true financial condition of our church? Read it in the paper, you listen for it on the radio. Every couple months, I stand in front of you. You see me do this scores and scores of times. I stand in front of you, and I go, here we are. Here's the true condition of our church. I'll do it real time right now in case any of you are visitors. First thing you need to know, we have no debt. And then the second thing you need to know is that we need a certain amount. This is the revenue requirements of our church from January through December. Just week after week, if we hit this line, we're a fully resourced ministry. We started the year just a little bit under this line, and then as of last weekend, we made all of that up, and we are dead on. It's scary, within like a couple $100 of being right on, being fully resourced. That's where we are. Does this help you as I define and declare reality? Now you know, right? Now you know. Okay. Great leaders do that kind of thing. Here's the next thing Nehemiah is going to do. It's finally time. He's got to cast the vision. Vision is the most potent offensive weapon in a leader's arsenal. Vision is a picture of the future that creates passion in people. And Nehemiah is working up to that moment where he's going to cast that vision. If you go to the Leadership Summit, where I teach about this thing a little bit, this vision casting thing and leadership stuff, I define leadership as moving people from here to there. Fundamentally, please get this if you get nothing else about leadership today. Fundamentally, leadership is about movement. It really is. You're moving people, you're moving a cause, you're moving a mission. God doesn't make you a leader to preside over something and keep it static. God doesn't make you a leader to protect a position where you go on autopilot. God doesn't make you a leader so you can pontificate to people under you how smart you are. God makes you a leader to move something. And I call it moving something from here to there. Now, the great temptation in moving something from here to there is when it comes time to cast the vision, the thing that the leader wants to do is describe the bliss of there right away. Hey, we're here. Here's where there is going to be, and it's going to be awesome. Nehemiah is smarter than this. Nehemiah is like Stanford, Harvard smart, and he's learned something some of us take decades to learn. Before you describe the bliss of there, when you're vision casting, you first have to tell people why you can no longer stay here. No longer. Can't stay here. This is unthinkable, unconscionable, unacceptable. No, terrible. You can't stay here. So watch how he does this. Comes right out of the text. He says in verse 17, then I said to them, here he goes, he's going to cast vision, but he starts by saying, you all see the trouble we're in. You see the trouble? You see the rubble? You see the gates burned down? Jerusalem lies in ruins. How do you like that? How does it feel? Its gates have been burned with fire. He goes, this is awful. 2 sentences later, he says, and God is being disgraced in the eyes of neighboring nations. Why is he saying that? He's saying because I want all of you to be so sick and tired, embarrassed, disgraced about being here that you're going to want to move there. And so when he tells them that this is terrible, then he shifts to the positive and he goes, now, come, arise and let's build the walls. We're no longer staying here. We're going to rebuild these walls. We're going to reclaim the credibility of God in the eyes of the neighboring nations. In so doing, we will no longer be a disgrace. And they replied, let us start rebuilding. They're like, yes, let's go. And then that last sentence, I love it. It says, and so they began the good work. This is just textbook leadership, gang. All of you who are in leadership, in the marketplace or wherever, next time it comes due for you to cast a vision, resist the temptation to describe the bliss of there first. Start by saying, we cannot stay here and build a case like a lawyer would. I'm going to give you 6 reasons why we can no longer stay here. Make it airtight. And then you create that tension and everyone goes, so then what shall we do? Where shall we go? And then do like Nehemiah. We're going to rebuild the wall for God's glory, and here's what it's going to do, and here's how great it's going to be with new gates and new walls and all that. And you'll have some fired up people. So, quick review. Nehemiah replenishes himself. He defines reality. He casts the vision. Next, beautifully, he gives everybody a quick jolt of motivation. A jolt of motivation, an injection of inspiration, a shot of spiritual adrenaline. This is personal opinion now. Most of us who lead people, I think we under-inspire people. Is that a fair statement? Most of us who lead people, we make clear expectations, we give people challenges, we expect results, and then we undercut. We just under-motivate, and motivation and inspiration is powerful. It shouldn't be neglected. So right after he casts the vision, he's saying, all right, I'm going to give you a little shot of inspiration on the backside of this vision. So he says, I also told him about the gracious hand of God being upon me and what the king had said to me. So here's what I think Nehemiah did. He cast the vision about rebuilding the wall, and he said, oh, one more thing. For any cynics, any skeptics among you who think that maybe God's not in this, let me tell you something. A few weeks ago, I walked into the palace of the king of Persia with tears streaming down my cheeks. I could have been imprisoned for it. And I told him that I was frustrated because Jerusalem, this holy city that we're standing in now, is lying in ruins. It was an embarrassment to God. I risked my life telling the king that. I asked him for a leave of absence, travel documents, and for loads of lumber to rebuild the gates. And he goes, I probably should have been in prison for what I did, but here's what I want you all to know. God's in this, guys. God's in this. There isn't some wild hair that I'm here doing this because I think it's a cool thing myself. God has preceded my vision cast to you just now. He gave me favor in the eyes of a Persian king. He gave me travel documents. We're building the gates of Jerusalem with wood from Persia. God's in this. He's just motivating them. He's saying God's going to grant us success. Leaders, anytime you're leading people and you can tell a story that indicates that God's in this thing, that it's not just your petty little dream, it's not just your little idea. Anytime you can tell a motivational story, tell it. Tell it 100 times. Tell it 500 times. People need to be inspired and motivated. By the way, years ago, I did a 6-month study. This was in preparation for the Leadership Summit. I did a 6-month study on the power of motivation. What inspiration does to the average worker. Did you know that when you compare just an uninspired worker with an inspired worker, there's a 40% performance differential between an uninspired worker and a highly inspired worker? Can you get your head around what 40% performance differential means? This is staggering, gang. And then I had to go on and do some more research and ask myself, or answer the question for myself, then how do I inspire the people around me to that 40% differential level? How do I do that? Well, the first things that come to mind, you would say, well, I should probably pay them more, give them better titles, bigger offices, more equipment, all this kind of stuff. After going through all the research, guess what inspires your workers more than anything else? When you, as the leader, come to work every day fired up yourself. Inspired leaders inspire just by the bounce in their step, the fire in their eye, the passion in their spirit. It affects the people around them. Now, yes, you should be paying attention to titles and compensation and all the rest. But that will not overcome you moping in, dragging your feet, being down, but if you want an inspired culture, you have to come to work as the leader, super inspired yourself. That's what has a tremendous effect on people around you. So he replenishes himself, defines reality, casts the vision, he adds some inspiration. I'll show you 2 more leadership moves, and then that'll be enough for today. So just humor me, okay? The next thing he does is he attempts to include absolutely everybody in this wall building, gate building project. Everybody. Nehemiah understands what I call the power of everybody. The power of everybody. I don't know how many of you have ever played on an athletic team of some sort. When there was a defined team and you were going to compete and try to win something or defeat an opponent. When you're on a team and everybody on that team is doing their absolute best, it's the power of everybody dynamic, and it gives you an extra edge, extra motivation. That sailboat racing team that I was on that time that won the national championship, we practiced harder. We went down to the boat earlier. We stayed at the boat later. We were totally committed. Everybody on the team was really committed. So a lot of leaders, just when they're going to start a new initiative or try to start something, because of the lack of self-confidence, they go into it and they say, you know what, I'm just going to cast a weak vision and maybe a couple people will want to join in. There's a few more leaders who are a little bit more confident, and they'll say, I'll cast a bold vision and hope that maybe even more people than a few people will want to join me. Nehemiah is swinging for the fences. He says, you know what I'm going to do? He said, I'm going to cast a white, hot, God-honoring vision, the hottest vision I can cast. I'm going to spread that net so wide. I want everybody in this city to buy into this vision. I'm shooting for everybody. I want everybody in, you see? Now, 3 guys opt out, as you read, and we're going to talk about them next week. But other than those 3 guys, pretty much everybody responded to this vision. Chapter 3, verse 1 says the high priest, the actual high priest in Jerusalem, and all of his fellow priests went to work. This had to blow everybody's mind because the clergy in that day paid attention to hearts and souls. They didn't do manual labor. Clergy didn't do that. They had all these uniforms, had dresses, had clean hands and all that. And all of a sudden, everyone in the city sees the high priest and all the other priests with work gloves on. They go, this is cool. Everybody's getting involved in this. Nehemiah 3:8 says that a goldsmith comes out of his shop, and then a maker of perfume. This is above these people's, it's below their pay grade actually, but they leave their shops and they pick up trowels and shovels and they start mixing mortar, and people are going, they're getting involved. Nehemiah 3:12, a father certainly involves all of his sons, but it goes to this level of detail in the text. It says that the guy included all of his daughters. He's like, you know what, of course the sons are going to do this. I'm going to get all my daughters involved. And all of a sudden, all the other fathers see that this guy's got his daughters involved. He's like, hey girls, come on out. Here we go. Soon the Levites jump in, other store owners, other merchants. Nehemiah's vision was cast so genuinely and was anointed by God so thoroughly that virtually everybody in this city signs up. Jim Collins calls this the flywheel effect. When you get everybody involved in something, and then you start turning that, and then you add a little inspiration, a little cheerleading onto that, you can get an unbelievable amount of momentum and unity and encouragement and enthusiasm going. Now, last week at the end of my sermon, I showed you some pictures of modern-day Nehemiahs, men and women at Willow who had learned of their holy discontent. And they had their Popeye moment where they said, that's all I can stand. I can't stand no more. They popped their can of spinach so they could push through their fear. And then they started making a difference somewhere in this church. And what was fascinating to me is last weekend at all 3 services, after every single picture, everybody applauded. They were like, that's awesome that that person did that. Now, I don't know what was going on in your mind, but I'll tell you what was going on in mine while we were flashing through those pictures. I started thinking, I wonder what would happen to our church. Here we go. If not just those few people on the slides had work gloves on and were doing something great for God in the church. What if everybody who calls Willow their home church, 25 or 30,000, what if everybody discovered their holy discontent? What if everybody humbled themselves before God? All of us. And said, God, show me something. Break my heart about something that's wrong in this world. What if everybody reached their Popeye moment and said, that's all I can stand, I can't stand no more? What if everybody popped their can of spinach to push through their fear? What if everybody suited up, got out of the spectator stands and did something fantastic for God, for His glory, to fix something that's wrong in this world? There's never been a church, I don't think. Well, I take that back. In Acts 2, 42 to 47, that's the section of Scripture that jolted me so hard, I left a family business, left the marketplace, and started the church. Acts 2, 42 to 47 says, and everybody leaned into the apostles' teaching, and everybody started praying bold prayers. And everybody got into fellowship. And everybody started caring for the poor. And everybody started worshiping with all their heart. And everybody started sharing the news of the resurrection of Jesus Christ. And it was that everybody thing that captured my imagination. I thought, what if I was ever in a church where everybody got out of the spectator stands and everybody suited up and everybody had work gloves and work boots on. Everybody was doing something for the glory of God and in the power of God. I feel a little bad that maybe I've lowered the bar around Willow. I feel that maybe the fact that everybody is not in the game at Willow might partially be my fault. I own this. Because we can get a lot of work done without everybody. And so I often just settle for the amount of work that we can get done with the amount of people who are willing to be in the game. And maybe it's on me that I haven't called you out and invited everybody to do it. Every serious-minded person who says they're a Christian ought to do. Get your heart broken by something that breaks the heart of God. Have your Popeye moment, suit up, and get in the game. You do not want to stand. You do not want to stand before the one who redeemed you someday with a clean uniform. Say, I never got in the game. Just enjoyed attending church and keeping the uniform clean for 40 years. Not cool, gang. Not cool at all. And I know you all have your excuses. They're just not going to sound right on the other side. What if every one of us knew our spiritual gifts and were using them? What if every one of us were faithfully giving our tithes and offerings? Every one of us. What if every one of us made one invitation a week for our family and friends to join us at church? Just one email, one invitation. What if every one of us were leveraging social media to tell God's story of Willow to our family and friends? Gang, Nehemiah understood the power of everybody. And he did his level best to just include every single person. And except for those three guys, everybody got in the game. Someone asked me at a recent speaking engagement, they said, what in the last year of Willow has really touched your heart? And I said, well, there are two times that come to mind immediately. I said, the first is, we do a thing called Celebration of Hope, and we had to pack 1 million seed packs. They were like, you didn't read that right. It can't be the right number. I said, no. Our church packed 1 million seed packs. And they said, how many volunteers did that take? I said, pretty much everybody. And when I said that, I thought, that's what is so exciting about Celebration of Hope. It's that time of the spring when everybody, it's coming up in a couple weeks, and I'm going to give you the same pitch that I do every year. I'm going to give you the same pitch. If you're too busy to pack seeds for the poor, you're what? You're too busy. Yeah, I'm going to give you that, so be braced. It's coming, okay? And then the other time that I mentioned to the person who was asking is last December when we did an assembly line right in the service here, and we packed 32,000 or 34,000 presents for prisoners. And then we all held them up, and we brought them to the prisoners. And the reason that touched me so much is because everybody did it. So just fair warning, I want to raise the bar back up to invite everybody out of the spectator stands onto the playing field. Everybody work gloves, everybody work boots. And then that's all I can do. It's all Nehemiah could do. Cast the vision for the power of everybody, and then you as individuals have to decide between you and God what you're going to do. Then that's all we can do. One last thing, and then I'll let you go. Last thing Nehemiah did, again, Stanford, Harvard kind of understanding of leadership. He aligns people's interests. This is, you have to read this book and get into the fine print, because I think he probably had to take out a map, but he goes to everybody in the city, and he says to them, like the Smith family, probably some Smiths back then in Jerusalem, right? You think? So he goes to the Smiths, and he goes, hey, okay, all of you Smiths, meeting, where are you going to build your house? Where is your shop going to be? And they go, well, we're going to build our house and our shop like right here maybe. And he goes, that's fine with me, but then I want you to rebuild this part of the wall here. Okay, Anderson family. Okay, all the Andersons, all right? Andersons are going to, a lot of them probably, right, back there in that day. So the Andersons, all right? And they go, where are you going to build your homes? They say, there's a bunch of us. We're going to build our homes, build our shops here. He goes, okay, then I want you to rebuild this part of the wall. Hybels. And we said, well, we're cheap. We're going to do just a tiny little place there. And he goes, well, then you build a wall right by your tiny little dump right there, okay? All right. Gang, this is brilliant. What happens? What happens to everybody who he assigns to build the wall right by their house? How diligently do you think they're going to do their jobs if the only thing protecting them from the enemy is the strength of the wall right by their house? How strong are they going to make the mortar? How carefully are they going to lay the bricks? This is genius leadership. Every time in leadership that you can layer in another alignment of people's interests, be it, that's their passion area. Well, they'd like to take further schooling in that area. Everything you can align with the overall vision of your organization, it just builds deeper and deeper ownership. And Nehemiah gets this. And he goes, these people are just going to bust it to make sure the wall is strong because they have an aligned interest, because their house is by it, you see? All right, now I have to push the pause button here on the content portion of this. We're going to pick up the story next week. It really gets interesting next week because the opposition comes. So far, it's been exciting. Now the opposition comes. If you've ever had to lead through opposition, don't miss next week. But before I close in prayer, I have to have a brief heart-to-heart with those of you who have been entrusted with leadership responsibilities. I got to have a heart-to-heart talk with you. It won't take long. So if you have the spiritual gift of leadership in your top 3 gifts, or if you have a significant leadership role at work or in the community somewhere, you lead quite a few people, I want you to stand to your feet so I can have a heart-to-heart with you. And if someone around you has to push you up to do what you need to do, stand. There should be hundreds of you standing. Spiritual gift of leadership, or a significant number of people in leadership that have been entrusted to your care. Yeah, this is about what it should be, I think. Okay, now leaders, listen carefully. I'm not going to mince any words, take any of the edge off this. You've heard me say this 100 times. There is only one commodity in the cosmos that God really, really treasures, and that's people. That's what God treasures most, is people. And He's entrusted what He treasures most to your care, because you lead people. You lead what He treasures most. Wrap your head around that. Okay, Romans 12:8 says, those entrusted with the spiritual gift of leadership must lead diligently, which I take to mean you've got to get better as a leader. You don't have much choice in this. You just have to get better if you're going to obey this verse. How do you get better as a leader? First, you read everything that you can read about leadership. You can become such a better leader if you will read. Don't read leadership stuff recreationally, or you'll never get around to it. You have to read great leadership stuff as a discipline. You say, I'm going to read a great leadership book every month or every other month. I'm going to read articles, whatever. You must read as a discipline. You get so much better by simply reading great leadership stuff. Second, go where leadership is taught. The Global Leadership Summit. conferences, seminars, often late at night. If I can't go to sleep right away, I'll go online. There's fantastic leadership lessons that you can take online for free. Go where leadership is taught. Third, get around leaders who are ahead of you and ask them how they got there. Ask them smart questions. Fourth, keep leading whatever you're leading, but try to get better at it. Try to do it a little better every single day. At Willow here, we have a little mantra called incessant tinkering. We say if you're leading something, you don't just get it to a certain level and leave it on autopilot at that level. Every day you come in and you try to make it a little better. You try to apply it to a few more people. You try to fix it and see if you can make it more effective. See if you can lower the cost. But you're trying to make something a little better every day. If you get 5% better in leadership over 5 or 10 years, then my other mantra comes true. Everybody wins when a leader gets better. Think about it. Everybody wins when a leader gets better. Your executive team, your leadership team, your constituents, your shareholders, your church members, whatever, people in your youth group, whatever. Everybody wins if you will get a little bit better. So that's the first thing. Everybody, take responsibility for getting better as a leader. Here's my final challenge to you. It's time for me to invite those of you who only exercise your God-given leadership gifts at work to find a place around the church where you can invest some of that leadership talent in moving things ahead here at the church. I almost went to a nut house in my junior high and senior high years in the little church that I grew up in. Low-functioning church, all kinds of problems that never got addressed or resolved. And yet in that church, we had a lot of fantastic leaders who built successful companies Monday through Friday. And I would watch everybody's companies growing while our church remained dysfunctional, diseased, and slowly dying. This made no sense to me. I was like, why don't some of these leaders solve some of our church's problems? But they didn't. Monday morning, they would flip that leadership gift, that leadership talent on, and they would go to work, and they'd cast vision. And they would solve problems, and they would increase market share and lower expenses, and, you know, and they went from driving Fords to Mercurys to Lincolns to BMWs. I watched this. Watched the parking lot change in the church that I attended, okay? And then they would drive in the parking lot after a successful week using their leadership gifts at work, and they would shut that switch off and watch our church die. I was like, this is insane. And our church, I've told you this before, it did eventually die. Put a for sale sign property, for sale sign out in front of the property. We sold the thing, then the church dismantled. And I swore, if God ever gave me a position of responsibility in a church, that I would challenge every leader who only uses their God-given gift in the marketplace to take some percentage of that horsepower and invest it in moving things ahead in the church you love, in the church many of you found Christ in. So I'm looking over the crowd right now, and I know a lot of you guys, and gals, of course. We have people in this church who lead in the marketplace, 100 people. We have people in this church who lead thousands of people. And I'm glad that you're trying to be a Christian and use your leadership at work. You should glorify God at work. But if you take 100% of your God-given leadership potential and it all goes to work and none of it comes to the church that you worship in every week, something's wrong. And you need to get that fixed. Did you know that right now we have initiatives around Willow that we can fund that we just can't launch because we don't have high-capacity volunteer leaders to lead them? We have new regional congregations pre-funded. We can't start new regional congregations because we don't have the leaders, and some of you are so good at leadership, you could lead one of these regional congregations. You know you could. We have a dozen sections in our church that need section leaders, and some of you would have the time of your life. You wouldn't have to quit your job. You just, with 10%, with 20% of your leadership horsepower, you could build a section that would be awesome. But sooner or later, you got to step up and say, why am I taking 100% of what God entrusted me with leadership talent? Why am I giving 100% of that at work and 0% in my church? So I think that's got to change. So what we're going to do after my prayer is we're going to have several meetings that are going to happen. One is a baptism meeting. If you're thinking about being baptized, go down to the front on the right-hand side, and we're going to have a baptism information meeting. If you're brand new, you can go out in the lobby, and that's where those balloons are, and you can shake some hands with some people and find out about our church. If you have prayer needs, go to the prayer room. Any deep concerns in your life, go to the prayer room across the lobby. People waiting to pray for you there. But the fourth meeting we're going to have is one down in the bullpen area. I have almost my whole executive team down here. And we want to have a leadership conversation with all of you who have been tapped on the shoulder by God because of today's sermon and think you might need to get in the game because you're taking all of your leadership talent and putting it in one place and none of it goes to your church. And I'll tell you what exactly we're going to do. We're going to have you fill out a card, okay? If that's too intimidating, chicken. We're going to have you fill out a card. Give us your contact information. We're going to follow up on every single one of you who think maybe you're interested in leading something. We will get back to you. So I'm not inviting you to a long meeting. This is a 5-minute deal. You fill out this. You give us that information. We will contact you and say, let's have a cup of coffee and sit down and work it out. Where could you lead? Where could your leadership make a difference for God's purposes through our church? Fair enough? Now, look at people around you, okay, who are standing. Now, the rest of you stand up and put a hand on the shoulder of someone who's been standing for a long time. We're going to pray for these leaders, so put a hand on their shoulder. Don't caress their neck. That crosses a line. No weird stuff. Just put a hand on their shoulder, okay? In kind of solidarity, saying, look, I'm concerned for you. And then I'll say this prayer, we'll dismiss, and you know what meetings you need to go to. So here we go. So God, we know deep in our spirit that leadership matters. All the great things that happened in the Old Testament, you always tapped a leader on the shoulder. And that leader led something, built a team who led something. In the New Testament, we see Jesus lead, we see Paul lead, we see Peter lead. We see Timothy and Barnabas and other people lead, and great things happen. All throughout church history, all throughout human history, great movements happen when leaders get that holy discontent, say, that's all I can stand, I can't stand no more. And they take the risk and they lead something for your glory. God, raise up more leaders in our church. Cause them to want to do something great for your glory in your strength. We pray this in Jesus' name. Everyone agreed and said, amen. Blessings, everybody.